All right. Hello, everybody. So today I want to go over um, basically fetal development because there's a good chunk of your exam on fetal development, and then not only that, your end of course exam too. So l- to get started on this, we need to talk a little bit about the female reproductive system briefly before we get into the actual development. All right, so female reproductive system. Let's just start with the ovary. So there's two ovaries here, and really the primary function is to produce eggs or an ovum. An ovum is just a fancy way of saying a mature egg. So like on your exam, if you see egg or ovum, it's basically the same thing. All right, and then um, connected to the ovary, you have these tubes, which are, clearly named the fallopian tubes. These fallopian tubes, they connect the ovary to the uterus. And really, what happens in the fallopian tube is this is where the egg's going to get fertilized. So, um, once a mature egg will get released from the ovary, it'll go into the fallopian tube. And then, if it gets fertilized, it's going to happen somewhere in here. And then that fertilized egg will then move down into the uterus, implant itself, and then slowly start to develop. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so the uterus, it's a muscular organ. They like to use that word muscular on like your exams and stuff. So just kind of keep that in mind. And this is essentially the womb. It nurtures and fertilizes the egg, provide protection, all that kind of stuff. And then the cervix is just the bottom part of the uterus. This is what expands during labor. All right, so pregnancy has what we know as the gestation period, which is 9 months. It's divided into three different sections or three different trimesters, each about 3 months each. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens in each of the trimesters. All right, so this I kind of already started talking about. So again, you got your ovary here, the egg gets released, or the egg matures, it gets released, it moves into the fallopian tube. Okay, once it's in the fallopian tube, this is where fertilization would happen, okay, if it happens. And if it does happen, the egg gets fertilized, it turns into what's called a zygote. A zygote is just a fancy way of saying a fertilized egg. Which is going to have DNA from each of the parents. So the sperm and the egg, they each contain 23 chromosomes for each parent. So you combine them into a diploid cell, which of course is going to have 46 chromosomes. All right, so yeah, like I just said, a zygote is just a fancy way of saying a fertilized egg. Egg and sperm combined, it's a zygote, okay? And then after it becomes fertilized, like I said, it slowly moves down into the uterus. As it's moving down to the uterus, it's dividing over and over in a cluster of cells. So it becomes what you call a morula as it started to move down, and then a blastocyst. Don't get too caught up on those names. Those are just kind of transitional names. But then what happens when it's a blastocyst, okay, it's going to implant or embed itself into the lining of the uterus. All right, and then, like I said, so that's called implantation. And then, again, this is all in the first trimester, even before the egg is fertilized. That's still technically the first trimester, even if someone's not pregnant. That's why it can get a little confusing when it comes to determining, how long someone is in their pregnancy. So within that first trimester, a lot of things happen. Okay, a lot of major organs and everything develops. You have what's called gastrulation and then neurulation. Gastrulation, basically, that cluster of cells in the blastocyst, so the zygote morula blastocyst, that cluster of cells is going to turn into an embryo. Okay, that's a picture of an embryo on the bottom here. Okay. And then neurulation occurs. That's the development of the nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, all that stuff happens at a really, really young. So again, just an embryo here. And then pretty much all the major organs develop, and they may not be functioning yet, um, but they are developing. So kind of keep that in mind. A lot of what your EOC is going to ask is going to be in terms of, how, different chemicals and things that the mother takes in or anything is affected early on in the pregnancy, because that's because it's so vulnerable at this time, because so much is being developed in the first trimester. All right. And then all at the same kind of time there, within a couple of weeks, the heart starts beating. And it's not like this fully formed heart just randomly, it just starts beating. It's really just a cluster of cells that starts out, and some of them start beating at different times than others. And eventually they start beating in sync. And then, it starts to develop a little bit more. All right. And then also keep in mind at this time, before we have the placenta and the umbilical cord, I'll get into that in a minute. Um, you know, the embryo is feeding off of a yolk sac. So no different than a chicken egg. There's a yolk sac in there that's providing nourishment for the embryo, so the embryo can grow until it connects to the mother. Now, the way it connects to the mother is the placenta and the umbilical cord. So basically, the placenta is pretty much an organ that connects, that only grows during pregnancy. And it acts as basically almost like a giant filter for the mother. So for the mother's blood. So anything the mother eats or takes in, or any drugs they take, or smoking, whatever, that's going to go into the mother's blood. And then that's going to go into the embryo and fetus. So that's one of the important things why it's so careful to, for expectant mothers to be careful what they're putting in their body, because all of that goes in. Now, the placenta does filter a little bit. And then also keep in mind, this is how the fetus gets its oxygen from the blood in the mother. So, because obviously they're not breathing right now, and if they were, it would just be liquid. So the oxygen is, as you learned in the circulatory system, is carried throughout the blood. So the oxygen in the mother's blood goes into the placenta and then through the umbilical cord and into the fetus. By the way, embryo, fetus, I use those terms kind of interchangeably, but first it's called an embryo, and then around week 9, it's called a fetus, when it's able to, basically when it's connected by the placenta and umbilical cord. All right, second trimester, basically some of the organs start functioning. There's some movement, hearing, simple vision. It practices breathing, so obviously it's not going to breathe anything. It's practicing breathing that amniotic fluid. It's called amnion. So inside the amniotic sac, I should have kind of gone over that a second here. So you have this amniotic sac here. Basically provides protection. It's filled with fluid called amnion. It protects the embryo and the fetus as it's growing and allows for some movement in there. And then it starts doing sleep patterns. As far as your exam and stuff goes, really the big thing is to know most major stuff is formed during the first trimester. And then during the last trimester, what you need to know, I can almost guarantee you're going to be asked about this for the third trimester. The very last thing to fully develop is going to be the lungs. Okay, so if you forget anything, just make sure you know very last thing to develop, lungs. Because that's definitely probably going to be in one of your, or many of your exams. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right. And then just a side note, it's not on your exam or anything, but if you've ever watched any babies being born or video like that, sometimes they're covered in like this white stuff that's called vernix. So it's just a temporary, it basically ends up getting dissolved in the skin. It's just for protection. Okay, and that's pretty much it for this section. If you guys got any questions, let me know. If there's some extra stuff in your module there on fetal development that I did not cover, it's fair game for your module exam and your segment exam, but it's probably not going to be on your EOC. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's really big for this last section. There's a bunch of stuff in here that's on your module exam, segment exam, but not on your EOC. And I'll make another video going over the whole module, and I'll kind of cover the specifics what that is. But primarily, a lot of the stuff on like skin, bones, muscles, digestive system, um, stuff that's not on. All right, but that's everything. If you guys need anything, as always, let me know. Otherwise,